Welcome to the Holy Post. Since World War II, the United States has been actively engaged in foreign aid as part of its strategic foreign policy, and Christians of all theological and political views have broadly supported this effort. But in the first month of the Trump administration, Christians on the far right have suddenly turned against international aid. What's behind this change, and are there parallels on the religious left? And what does it mean when MAGA Catholics are arguing directly with Pope Francis about immigrants, refugees, and the poor? Then author and journalist Katherine Stewart has investigated the religious nationalist movement for 15 years. She says there's a major disconnect between the super rich who are funding the movement, many of whom aren't even Christians, and the average white evangelical caught up in its conspiracy theories and events. She talks with me about her new book, Money, Lies, and God. Also this week, Phil looks at larvae and sees the face of God. A reminder that we've just launched Season 2 of Why I'm Still a Christian exclusively for Holy Post Plus subscribers. Last week I interviewed Beth Moore, and this week features Phil's conversation with Rachel Denhollander. The good news is that we're still offering a 1-week free trial for new Holy Post Plus subscribers. So you can sign up for free right now, check out Why I'm Still a Christian, and see everything else that's available on Holy Post Plus at no risk. I think you're going to love it. Just go to holypost.com to learn more. Here is episode 657.
Hey there, welcome back to the Holy Post Podcast. I'm Phil Vischer. I'm here with Skye Jitani. Hi, Skye.
Hi, Phil.
Just back from a cruise that I'm not supposed to ask him about, so I won't. And Caitlin Chess. Hi, Caitlin.
Hi, Phil.
Caitlin is in person in Wheaton.
Big deal.
It's a big deal.
And she's infected.
She's sick. Caitlin is sick, but she's still enjoying the snow.
I'm a trooper, though.
Mm-hmm.
Have you gone sledding?
No.
I
should. That's what I should do in my illness. Is tonight I should be out in wet, cold.
Yeah.
snow.
Mm-hmm. It's 10 degrees out currently. Our low today was. It just went down to 9. Sorry.
Oh my
Update.
gosh.
Our low today is.
I think I'm just reacting to like this temperature that I'm not used to.
Yeah. Our low today is 3 below 0 for our British friends. That's Fahrenheit, not Celsius. So you do the math.
Cold.
It's cold. And now, the theme song.
What's the news that you like the most? Who's your favorite podcast host? If it's breakfast, get your toast. It's Skye and Phil and the Holy Post. Skye and Phil and the Holy Post. And sometimes Caitlin.
This episode of the Holy Post is sponsored by Faithful Counseling. We've just come through a really stressful election here, and it doesn't look like things are going to get better anytime soon. Deleting Twitter from my phone has helped, but some levels of stress and anxiety can't just be deleted like an app. Sometimes we need real help. Faithful Counseling is a Christian counseling service with more than 3,000 licensed therapists across all 50 states, with access by video or phone sessions or even chat and text, with expertise in depression, stress, anxiety, trauma, family conflicts, and more. It's more affordable than traditional counseling, and financial aid is available for those who qualify. We all need to talk to someone sometime, and Faithful Counseling can help. Continue growing into the best version of yourself. Visit faithfulcounseling.com/holy post and get the professional, faith-based counseling that you need. They've even got a special offer for our listeners. Right now, you can get 10% off your first month at faithfulcounseling.com/holy post.
You know that I'm a skeptic. I like things to have evidence, proof, data. I like to research things before I commit to them. And that even goes for my supplements. I want to know that they're high quality. That's why for the last year, I've been drinking AG1. Unlike many supplement brands, AG1 conducts relentless testing to set the standard for purity and potency. I know I can trust what's in every scoop of AG1 because it's tested for 950 contaminants and banned substances, while the industry standard typically only tests for 10. AG1's ingredients are also heavily researched for efficacy and quality, and I love that every scoop also includes prebiotics, probiotics, and digestive enzymes for gut health. So, if you want to replace your multivitamins and your digestive aids, your immune support into just one simple scoop, start with AG1. Try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D3 and K2 and 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first subscription at drinkag1.com/holypost. That's drinkag1.com/holypost. Go check it out, and thanks to AG1 for sponsoring this episode.
Do you know what we haven't done in quite a while?
No.
Do you know, Skye, do you know? I know that you don't want to talk about the cruise, but while you were on the cruise, did you think to yourself, do you know what we haven't done in quite a while? We haven't done a news of the butt.
And now it's time for news of the butt.
I've so enjoyed this time.
It's been a butt hiatus.
Oh my gosh.
This has got some ick to it, but it's not, it's different ick. It's not, it's okay because it's not
butt ick.
Yes. I wasn't going to say that.
You're okay. You can't have this segment and own this segment and then like distance yourself from the.
Do it.
I've been doing it for years.
Okay.
Moroccan fly maggot. I don't like the word maggot. Do you like the word maggot?
No, or the thing.
I think it's one of the more unpleasant creatures.
Yeah.
Then it's appropriately named.
Because it is gross.
Right.
Yeah.
I think they named it first, and then the connotation was developed. But it's a fly larva, so I'm just going to call it larva. Okay. Moroccan fly larva uses fake face on its butt to infiltrate termite colonies.
What is it like? Does the face look like the termite's uncle? We're just here for a visit?
Yep. It does. Mountain fly larvae have evolved fake faces on their butts as a cunning disguise to infiltrate termite colonies, a new study has found. Researchers spotted the fake faces, which resemble termite heads, on the rear of a previously unknown blowfly larva living in the mountains of Morocco. Have you spent much time looking for blowfly larvae in the mountains of Morocco?
Absolutely none.
Well, these guys have.
They're not the brightest
Wow.
things, are they?
And the researchers?
No, the blowfly larva, because if they can't tell the difference between their own species and another species'
it's the
butt.
termites that can't tell the difference.
Right, the termites are dumb.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't come here just to insult termites, Skye. I don't know how you roll, but that's not. I don't think that's the Christian thing. Their faces are part of an extreme mimicking strategy that tricks harvester termites into thinking the fly larvae are part of their colony. Soldier termites typically kill colony intruders on sight. I think we all know that.
Right, obviously.
When I tried to go into a termite colony, the soldiers tried to kill me on sight. They just started shooting.
Classic strategy.
Serious bouncers right there.
Yeah. But disguised larvae live among the soldiers without any problems and are granted full access to the termite mound's food chamber. They let them into the Waffle House.
Do they have to walk backwards the whole time?
Only when they greet people. Hello? Hello? I'd like to have some food. I'm going to eat it with my butt, so excuse me if I turn around. The disguise is so good that the termites even appear to groom the larvae like they groom each other. What? I know. Are you like...
So what happens when they're found out? Because they don't stay larvae.
Well, I assume they leave before that. Termite nests are protected, food-rich habitats for any species cunning enough to get inside. The fly's strategy is one of social integration, which requires extreme morphological, behavioral, and physiological adaptations to pull off. That's... Okay. So, for example, the larvae, that's plural, larvae had modified breathing holes that look like fake termite eyes and modified sensory organs, little feelers called papillae. That was my nickname in high school when I was in Spanish class. That resemble termite antennas. So they have little antennas that go backwards on their butts that look just like termite antennas. And they have breathing holes on their butts that look like termite eyeballs. Is that amazing? Okay, here's why I'm bringing this up. Do you want to know why I'm bringing this up?
There's a reason.
Besides the fact that it's news of the butt. There are some things that for me call into question the efficacy of purely Darwinian explanations for everything.
So in other words, when you are talking to a skeptic and they ask you, Phil, why are you still a Christian? You say... Because of larva butts.
Have you seen what the blowflies of the mountains of Madagascar have come up with on their butts? That's what I say. There is a God.
I'm sure that's effective.
There is a God. Okay. If you are going to go purely naturalistic, Darwinistic evolution, everything is because of a random mutation, and every random mutation to be carried along has to provide a survival benefit. Mm-hmm. So you have to have, in this case, and there are lots of cases like this, but these I just get hung up on cases like this. You have to have mutations that change their appearance. You have to have mutations that changed their behavior, because their parents aren't teaching them this. If you're a fly larva, you never meet your parents. You're just, whoop, you just grow up and do stuff that's wired into you. That's what you do. You just do stuff that's like cicadas. Who's my mommy? Well, she's been dead for 17 years, so get over it.
Oh my gosh.
They also, this is even better because termites can smell what termites are supposed to smell like. They've adapted to smell like termites. So you've changed how you smell, you've changed how you behave, and you've changed how you appear through tiny mutations that positively happen very rarely. Mm-hmm. Most mutations are negative.
Right.
That somehow make you more likely to survive each little step. And I don't buy it that that's possible. I just don't think that could happen with something.
Okay.
When you have multiple elements that have to happen together to provide benefit, I don't see how it could happen.
Plausibility.
Yeah. So I'm not necessarily saying that God is saying, I will design the butt of this maggot to give it a new food source. I mean, he could. Yeah. I'm not saying that that's the only other alternative. I'm just saying naturalistic, Darwinian.
Some artists work in marble, others oils. God works in maggot butts.
In the butt of a maggot.
Yeah.
In the butt of a maggot.
Wow.
I found the face of God. I think that was Augustine.
No, it was not.
No? Well, Skye liked it.
He said some weird things, but not that weird.
I'm going to wrap this up. This has been the news of the butt.
This has been the news of the butt.
I forgot to acknowledge Skye's hat. Skye, tell us about your cap.
My cap comes from a listener.
Two listeners.
Is it General Chess?
General Chess.
Okay, I didn't. It's just general. Correct?
There's a more specific one, but yeah, general works.
Okay, so Caitlin's father is a general in the Space Force.
Yes.
And your parents sent me this hat. It's a Space Force hat, everyone.
Space Force hat.
It's a little small for my head.
They have smaller heads in the military than yours.
I don't think so.
It's the lack of gravity in space that shrinks their heads.
Well, yeah, this would float right off of me because there's nothing to grip. But it's a cool hat. I mean, everyone made fun of the Space Force logo.
It's very Star Trek.
There's just too many space things that are already captured by pop culture. There's not a lot left for them to do.
Not a lot of room for them to maneuver.
Yeah,
okay.
Exactly.
I'm not really sure about that. I think there's plenty. Okay, but it comes with a note that I have not read yet.
Yeah, exciting.
Is that on Space Force stationery?
Yes, look at that.
Oh my God.
Listen,
Space Force.
Doug and Debbie are classy people.
It's Doug and Debbie?
Mm-hmm.
Doug and Debbie.
Okay.
Doug and Debbie to infinity and beyond.
Skye, we thought you might like a Space Force hat to add to your collection. Thank you for your voice in this space. Doug and Debbie Chess. P.S. As far as aliens go, can neither confirm or deny.
Oh. Did you say or deny or nor deny?
It says or.
Oh,
It's
well, maybe
or.
So that means the opposite.
But
that means the opposite. So she is confirming.
But that is not a denial.
It's
It's neither.
We were wondering if he was over Area 51. And did you ask?
I have no idea what he does.
I think that's Air Force.
But I do.
Yeah, probably.
Well, when they made the Space Force, they pulled a lot of Air Force things.
Yeah, but the section that has the aliens in it, wouldn't they pull that out for the Space Force?
They may. But okay, first of all, Doug and Debbie, or I should say General and Mrs. Chess.
Yes.
Thank you very much for the hat. It's very thoughtful, very kind. It will have a place of honor in my collection. We now have these hats displayed in the office upstairs.
It's very cool.
It is very cool. So thank you, and honored to know somebody who serves our country faithfully in, space.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. The hat goes on the glass head.
Yes.
And we press on.
Yeah.
Stuff's been going on, and I'm not happy about it. And I've had to tweet about it.
Did you have to?
Yeah.
Because when stuff goes wrong,
You have to do something.
You have to do something.
Caitlin, we can't do nothing.
Know if Phil didn't
No
tweet
one would
about
know
it.
that something was wrong if Phil didn't tell them.
Nothing. We have to speak up.
Yeah,
Okay, here's
okay.
my point.
What
Here's my
is
point.
your point?
Here's my point. If you are participating in a democracy as a Christian, this is my liturgy of politics.
Oh, okay.
If you are participating in a democracy as a Christian, at the very least, you should use your voice to speak up for those who can't be heard.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, you good with that?
Yeah,
that's why I tweet.
I'm on your
That is
team
why
on
I
that.
tweet because
I don't know that there's as tight a connection between that and
Super
tweeting
tight.
as you
Super
think
tight.
that there is.
super tight.
Okay.
Trump goes after religious groups, and the religious groups are fighting back. So there's been more
Sound very Christian.
more bad things are happening. Catholic charities are warning, international Catholic charities are warning that millions could die if the halt in U.S. aid continues. That might sound extreme, but that's what they're saying. As the Trump administration put a 90-day hold on foreign aid payments in order to look for what it termed wasteful spending, leaders of Catholic aid groups are warning that even short delays will result in the deaths among aid recipients, as well as breaks in significant help being offered Sudanese threatened by famine, unaccompanied Ethiopian refugee children, and Yazidis and Christians in Iraq, Iran. I always get those messed up. Iraq, Iran.
I think you can do Iraq.
Iraq, Iran. Iraq. Caitlin,
Iran and Iraq.
can you
I don't
call
know
your
what's so
dad?
hard
Can we
about
call
that.
the general? Millions of people will die and hundreds of millions more will suffer, said Alistair Dutton, Secretary General of Caritas International, a federation of Catholic aid groups with 162 member organizations around the world. U.S. government funding made up 40% of all global humanitarian aid tracked by the United Nations in 2024, and Catholic organizations play a major role in running programs funded by that aid. Catholic Relief Services is the top recipient of funds from the U.S. Agency for International Development, which Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency has largely dismantled. So Catholics are raising major concern. Tens of thousands go hungry in Sudan after Trump aid freeze. People will die because of these decisions, said a Sudanese fundraising volunteer. We have 40 kitchens across the country feeding between 30,000 to 35,000 people every day. All of them had closed after Trump announced the freezing of foreign assistance. Women and children are being turned away, and we can't promise them when we can feed them again. Since April 2023, Sudan has been torn apart by a war between its regular army and the paramilitary. In addition to killing tens of thousands of people and uprooting over 12 million, the war in Sudan has pushed 5 areas of the country into famine and nearly 25 million people into acute food security. Who was feeding them more than anyone else? The United States. Who just stopped feeding them? The United States. Okay, that's concerning. As Trump officials demonize faith-based partners, government grants are called heresy. This is where it's getting weird. This is Religion News Service, our friend Bob Smetana writing. Faith groups have long received government grants to feed the hungry, respond to disasters, and assist those in need, but recent comments from Trump administration officials have cast such grants in a bad light. In late January, North Carolina Governor Josh Stein announced $30 million in grants to fund his state's recovery from Hurricane Helene. Included was $6 million for 2 faith-based groups helping rebuild homes after the storm, $3 million for Habitat for Humanity, and $3 million for Baptists on Mission, an auxiliary of the Baptist State Convention in North Carolina. The Baptists plan to use their $3 million to buy building supplies to repair as many as 1,000 homes in the coming year. Okay. Is that good or bad? Is it good or bad? Repairing 1,000 homes, good or bad?
I'm going to say generally
Feel
good.
pretty good about that.
Okay, okay. But the Baptist decision to accept the grant comes as faith-based groups have been under fire for accepting federal funds for helping immigrants and refugees. President Donald Trump, have you heard of him? He's new. His political allies have called these grants money laundering and illegal, while some of the president's religious allies accused charities of selling their faith out to liberals. This led to a question from a listener. Hello, listeners. Sometimes you send in questions, and generally they don't get read on the show. But this was pertinent, partly because I've seen this exact question come up so many times on social media in the last year. Here's the question from a listener who will not be named because he didn't say you can use my name. He or she. I don't want to narrow it down. I listened to your discussion on USAID and had a question I'd love to hear you discuss on a future podcast. I'm a never Trumper, so this is not intended to be a defense of him. My question is whether our government should be funding humanitarian aid for foreign countries. Is that biblical? Is that a biblical valid role of government, especially a government that can't pay its own bills? As a husband-father, I have a biblical obligation to provide for my family, whether that means incurring debt, working multiple jobs, etc. But I don't think I have a biblical obligation to provide for all families at any cost. I must be generous and not hoard wealth, but I don't think I have an obligation to work multiple jobs, take out loans, etc. to feed all families. In the same way, isn't our government's obligation to us as Americans? Does it have a biblical obligation to fund aid for countries around the world, especially if that aid does not align with U.S. interests? Does our government have a biblical mandate to care for the poor around the world, or is that the mandate of the church?
I have a lot of thoughts.
Yeah,
Who wants to go first?
Yeah.
You go for it, Skye.
Okay. I want to share a little history.
Ooh.
We have to understand how we got to this place of USAID.
Yeah. Where are you starting?
I'm starting post World War I.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Seems like a good place to start.
It's a very good place to start.
Yeah.
At the beginning.
Yeah.
World War I.
Okay.
So World War I happens. Obviously, Germany is one of the big losers in World War I. And in the treaties that were signed at the end of that, they were very punitive against Germany, very harsh against Germany. And part of the effect of that, because the rest of the world was really angry at Germany for causing a lot of this carnage in Europe, but part of the effect of that punitive outcome against Germany was the German people suffered a lot in the decade after World War I, which is exactly the conditions that led then to the rise of the Third Reich, to Hitler, to the Nazis, and it sparked World War II. Mm-hmm. And therefore, when World War II was coming to an end, the Allies realized we can't do to Germany what we did after the last war, and we can't do that to Japan. We have to have a different approach because we really don't want a World War III. Mm-hmm. So at the end of World War II, rather than being highly punitive against the Japanese and against the Germans, what the Allies chose to do was we are actually going to invest in and rebuild these countries. We're going to rebuild Germany. We're going to rebuild Japan, because if they are stable and affluent and their citizens are cared for, they're less likely to turn toward an extremist regime to seek vengeance against us again. And that's exactly what the world did. The United States was the primary engine of that effort. We rebuilt Germany and Japan into thriving economies, great educational opportunities, and they're two pillars of the global economy right now. Well, then you fast forward to the 1960s and the Cold War is in full swing. John Kennedy is the president, and he realizes there is a global competition for allegiance either to the United States or to the Soviet Union. And John Kennedy comes up with the idea for USAID, realizing how effective it was after World War II, the effort to rebuild Germany and Japan, and decides, hey, if we take some of this effort and invest in parts of the world that are struggling right now, they're more likely going to align with the United States. They're going to see us as benevolent. They're going to see us as generous. They're going to see us as allies. And if there ever is a global conflict, they will be on our side. So John Kennedy created USAID because it was in the interest of the United States to help countries that were struggling. And that has continued to be our effort around the world. This is a tiny fraction of our budget, and it pays back multiple dividends in goodwill and strategic alliances around the world. And to just shut all that down. I mean, this guy creates the argument of, well, I need to care for my family and its needs. I agree, 100%. Now imagine your next door neighbor is literally starving. Don't you think that dad in that house whose kids are starving is a threat to you and your family if you have plenty and they don't? It's in your interest to make sure your next door neighbor isn't starving, because it's dangerous for you to be living next to a desperate family that might take up arms against you to get some of your food. So it is in the self-interest of the United States to be strategically investing in some of these poorer parts of the world, because poor people destabilize economies and political structures and suck America into all kinds of problems.
But if Romans 13 tells us what a government is supposed to do, and it's an exhaustive list, there is no international aid in Romans 13. So therefore, Jesus is mad if the government helps poor people.
Jesus is mad.
Well, if Romans 13 is an exhaustive list of what the government should do, then the government shouldn't be building virtually anything that we have in the United States, including airports and roads and armies. This is nothing about armies in Romans 13. So why do we have a military?
Caitlin, help me out.
The idea that Romans 13 is an exhaustive political theology is just not true. People treat it as if it is giving like the bounds of what a government should do, and it clearly is not.
How do you know it's not?
Well, partially because it's Paul writing to a church in a particular time and place, and he has a theological reason for describing the role of government. And the reason is not to say to this mostly politically powerless group of people, you use your power in the Roman Empire to make sure the Roman Empire doesn't do things the Roman Empire shouldn't. That's not the instruction at all. It's how they are supposed to engage with and interact with a structure that exists that they had no imagination for possibly having any power over. So first of all, it's a challenge to apply lots of biblical passages to a question today of what the role of the government should be, because nothing in the New Testament assumes that Christians have the power to change what the government should be. But also, it's interesting that Romans 13, like the part that people miss so often is that the instruction to Christians is to do more with the government as opposed to less. Like the end of all of those instructions, like yes, it describes the sword being given to the government. It also, though, ends with the instructions we never pay attention. I mean, we usually use Romans 13 if we are in love with whatever the government is doing and using it as sort of a weapon to say, like, you have to go along with this. If we don't like what the government is doing, we go to like Acts 5:29, we must obey God rather than human beings. We miss that the end is pay taxes, revenue, respect, honor. Like the instructions that Paul is giving is to a group of people that would have been tempted to say, let's hoard our resources internally, let's just focus on ourselves. The world outside is scary, sinful, and corrupting. And he says, actually, you have obligations outside of yourself, including obligations to the government that you live under. And what I think is missing so much from the USAID conversation is that fundamentally this is a misunderstanding, to Skye's point about how interconnected the world is and how much it matters what the United States does in terms of foreign aid, but also just a lack of imagination, both on a personal neighborhood level and on a national or international level, that like we have obligations to other people that we did not choose or ask for, but that we just find ourselves in obligation to other people. Like this is true of individuals. I didn't choose to be obligated to my neighbors or to my family. I was born into a family and bam, I have obligations to them. I belong to a church. I didn't know that this person was going to be sick or this baby was going to be born with disabilities or this struggle would happen in our denomination, but whoa, I have obligations there. The same is true of whoever's in charge of the United States government. Like you didn't get to choose all the obligations we would have, but we've made promises. We have obligations. The things that we do deeply affect other people. And I think not only do we need to understand this history and kind of the logic that Skye is giving of how this aid is not just handouts, but actually is strategically valuable for the United States, but the like theological or deeper problem underneath it is usually this idea that we have bought into a pretty modern, pretty like libertarian idea that any obligation I have is just one that I choose freely and I can just choose not to if I don't want to. And instead the truth is like nations, individuals, families, neighborhoods, like you just have obligations to other people that you didn't choose. And particularly in Romans 13, part of the instruction is like those obligations are actually good. And it actually is part of your worship of God to fulfill those obligations.
So something that I think I agree with that. By the way. Something I think we forget, because all of these people are talking about our government as if we have nothing to do with it.
Yes.
And I typically come back, although I've stopped coming back at all because I'm not going to talk to people on Twitter. It's a very unhealthy aquarium full of very angry fish, and you don't need to get in it to interact with it. You can drop things in and then watch through the glass. You watch through the glass and you say, wow, look at them go after that one. That's amazing. Anywho.
Or you could just leave,
if you
go
are,
get some ice cream.
If you are part of the governance of your church, what you're discussing is what problems do we have and how can we work together to solve them? If you are part of the governance of your town, you're on the town board, you're on the road commission, you're on the park district commission, you're talking about what problems do we have and how can we work together to solve them. We are part of our government. We, the people, I don't know why this doesn't come up more. We are self-governed. The government isn't Caesar. The government is us. It's us. So when we say, what problems can we solve together? For Christians to say, we're not supposed to do that. We're not supposed to solve problems altogether. We're only supposed to solve problems individually. I don't know where that comes from. It doesn't make sense. And the only thing I can think is just the trend line of resistance to what the federal government was doing when the federal government did big things that we didn't like. So, post FDR, when FDR launched a whole mess of stuff, which generally people liked because it was helping them survive the Depression, then helping us through World War II. But a lot of those things stayed in place and we wanted them to go away and let's go back to the old way. And you had the Western parts of the country, which had kind of we're rugged individualists. We take care of ourselves. And it was, Arizona and the plains, the Western plains and Nebraska and settlers. But then you had the Deep South that was saying, actually, we're a segregationist environment, society, and we want to stay that way. So we deeply resent the federal government telling us we have to integrate. We would rather fill in our swimming pools than let African Americans swim in them. It was that attitude. So there was this great hostility toward the federal government in the West, where they just wanted to be left alone. And in the South, where you're telling us we have to change the hierarchy of our society, which was functionally an apartheid state, through the civil rights movement. So the civil rights movement and the kind of Western individualism came together in the person, or the resistance to the civil rights movement and Western individualism came together first in the person of Barry Goldwater, who said, I think I can make a new coalition. There could be, and the only states he won when he ran for president were his home state of Arizona. We're ranchers. We don't want the government coming on our land. And the Deep South. He won all of these segregation states. And that started this movement, this new coalition, which, who supported, I think this is interesting, who were the biggest boosters of Barry Goldwater? Who gave him his best slogan and wrote a book in his honor? And then who gave the speech that is known still today as the most amazing political speech that launched an amazing future career, but didn't help him win?
Ronald Reagan.
That was the second one.
Yeah, and Schlafly.
Yep, Phyllis Schlafly.
Yeah. So I got them both.
So Phyllis Schlafly was a huge booster of Goldwater, but for her own reasons. She was from Illinois. She was a Catholic from Illinois. She wasn't from a segregationist state. It wasn't necessarily about the civil rights movement, but she didn't like the overreach of government in lots of areas, and she wanted to play a role in it. But then Reagan came along, and he represented the Western, rancher, get government out of my business, and also extreme concern about communism and socialism, and was our government becoming too socialist? And those groups came together of the religious right, which Schlafly helped launch more than Falwell, more than other later figures. She did more to get that ball rolling. So the religious right ended up in a coalition with Southern segregationists and Western ranchers and frontiersmen who wanted to be left alone. And the message that they shared in common, it was not about Black people. It was not about ranching. It was not about the Equal Rights Amendment. It was about the government telling me what to do.
Yeah. Okay. I agree.
Are you with me?
I'm with you, but I think there's a significant disconnect between the narrative you've just explained and where we are today.
Okay. Go.
And the massive disconnect is Ronald Reagan, maybe Schlafly, I don't know for sure, but the conservative movement of the 70s, 80s, 90s, even into the 2000s was very, very, very pro-immigrant. It was pro-international aid.
It's because you're missing one more name.
It was pro-international alliance like NATO.
You're missing one more name.
Okay. So how do you, yes, the small government, get off my land kind of attitude has always been there. But I think that's changed. We're not in the small government thing.
Yeah.
I mean, the rhetoric around the USAID stuff is, they use the small government rhetoric and waste and spending. But okay, I looked it up. USAID budget for 2023 was $42 billion.
Yes.
Okay. Our military budget for 2023 was $619 billion.
Yes.
Just U.S. foreign military assistance in 2023 was $118 billion. So more than 3 times what USAID's were. And no one's talking about, hey, we need to stop spending militarily internationally, or we need to stop buying bombs for Israel and God. No one's talking about that. They're fine with big government.
They are talking about stopping supporting Ukraine.
But not Israel.
Military. No, because Israel, religious right. Okay, Israel.
I know, but what I'm saying is if you're
Ukraine is not in Revelation.
If you're really concerned, if you're really concerned about big government and overspending and spending money on foreign countries, not at home, then the biggest target you should be going after is our military, but not USAID.
Sacrosanct.
That's my point. It's not principled.
But Reagan wanted a bigger military.
Yeah, but he also wanted more foreign aid and more immigration.
Yes. Okay. The name you're missing is Pat Buchanan. That's the name you're missing, because that's where America First is revived from the 1920s, from the America First of Charles Lindbergh to the America First of Pat Buchanan to the America First of Donald Trump. Those 3 movements, the 1920s America First movement, the 1990s America First movement, and then the 2010s America First movement, all share 3 things: isolationism, protectionism, nativism.
Okay, but again, I'm going to disagree with you, Phil. And here's why.
You're going to get kicked off.
In the first month of the Trump presidency, we have not seen isolationalism.
It's the tariffs. Well, it's a
I want the Panama Canal back. I want Greenland. Yeah. Canada's a 51st state. That is not isolationism.
Skye, Trump's ideology is not cohesive.
No.
He picks and pulls at things, but the movement behind it, Project 2025, and there's a through line from Charles Lindbergh to Pat Buchanan to Steve Bannon?
Caitlin, you need to jump in here.
Yeah.
You do. You totally do.
I don't think there's any political ideology that can accurately define Donald Trump. I think he operates like a mob boss.
Yes.
Period.
Yeah,
and he sees the Western Hemisphere as America's territory. And we should be able to do whatever we want there. And he lets Putin do whatever he wants in his territory, and Xi do whatever he wants in China. And he can take Tibet, he can do it, or not Tibet, Taiwan. His attitude is of a mob boss. And the mob boss goes, why am I giving grain to people in Sudan? That's not my territory. I don't care about them.
Right. I don't need to offer them protection.
Right. They can't do anything for me.
Right.
So why should I do something for them?
Right.
That's how he thinks.
Which is fine.
Okay, Caitlin.
Why are Christians going along with it?
Well, what I was just going to say was, I think trying to find some consistency or pattern to Trump's political, ideas is a worthless task. I do think it really matters along the lines of the question that Phil read. It matters that we not only respond to the parts of this that are coherent ideas. Like, it is a coherent idea to say, well, no, maybe nations should just focus internally. They shouldn't focus very much on foreign aid. That's an idea that I disagree with, but it makes sense that a Christian or a non-Christian would ask that idea, and we should think thoughtfully about a theological response to it. The same is true of this kind of general anti-government idea. Mm-hmm. I know a lot of pretty pro-Trump people who are not thinking about all of the inconsistencies, or they're aware of the inconsistencies, but they don't care because there's certain things that Trump has promised to do that they are fans of. I do think having a robust theological response to this idea that the government is just the evil, kind of overlord to be opposed is an important theological response to have, even if it doesn't attack all of the inconsistencies that the Trump administration has. And I think this is where I get so frustrated with this. We talked about this like a week or two ago, the very intentional strategy that the Trump administration is doing of just throwing all of this random stuff at us so that we're constantly having to respond to these particular policy abominations at times, instead of saying, I really wish that there was better efforts for Christians to say, what is a robust theological response to just libertarianism, to this idea that foreign aid doesn't matter, to this idea that the government is always evil, because in 10 or 20 or 30 years, we won't. I mean, God willing, we will not still have Trump throwing these random policies at us. We will need better theological responses to this idea that the government is the evil, overlord. The church is the pure good, bringer of goodness into the world, or this idea that foreign aid is unnecessary because you should just look internally and focus on your own house.
But Caitlin, you've studied this longer and know it better than I do. It's just striking to me that we've been, as a country, engaged in foreign aid for a long time, at least since World War II, in a robust way. I cannot think of any time in my lifetime where there was an organized Christian objection to foreign aid. And maybe it existed at some point in the past that I'm unaware of, but I have not heard it until 2025, basically. And so it feels to me like, how do you have something that's been going on for 80 years that the church has primarily supported, wholeheartedly supported for 80 years, and in the course of a month does a 180 and completely change? That's not for a well thought through theological reason.
Right.
What's it for?
It is interesting that, maybe the most consistent biblical reference that was used during this particular administration's during the election for Trump was America as a shining city on a hill. And when that was used originally with John Winthrop, when that was used by Reagan, it was referenced a few times during the kind of social gospel movement, early 20th century. It was always used not just as America as a moral exemplar, but America as bringing goodness, even material goodness, to the nations, as sort of an evangelistic strategy for Christianity, because America is a supposedly Christian nation, but also just as a bringing goodwill to the nations.
We're liberating the oppressed and we're feeding the hungry.
This is what it means to be a good Christian nation. It's also what it means to be a nation that other countries think well of. Like, it's ironic that language is being used for an America first mentality, when for centuries it was used as we have every reason to bring aid to other nations.
Yeah, that's what I find so striking. Is I agree with Phil. There's been this long narrative of small government, anti-federalist kind of stuff, and that's been there. But this striking turn against foreign aid and refugees and all that, it's not been the Christian message for 100 years.
Yeah, but that's the nativism of America first. It was the nativism of Charles Lindbergh. It was the nativism of the Immigration Act of 1920.
Yeah, but that wasn't rooted in Christian theology.
No.
That's what's striking to me, is now there are Christian voices like the ones you're mentioning on Twitter who are saying this, even this question is basically saying, I don't have a Christian obligation to anyone other than my family.
He's not saying that. He's asking.
He's asking. But the fact that those arguments, J.D. Vance made that argument. We talked about it a few weeks ago.
Right.
Like, that's what's so bonkers to me, is there's literally 2,000 years of Christian tradition arguing against that. And in the course of 1 month, significant voices in the American church are now parroting the profoundly unbiblical view and saying this is biblical.
By the way, Pope Francis is rattling the Trump administration with a letter to U.S. bishops regarding the president's mass deportation policies, calling them a, quote, violation of the dignity of many men and women and entire families. The letter upset President Donald Trump's border czar, Tom Homan, also a Catholic, who, when asked by a reporter about the Pope's, quote, harsh words, said, I got harsh words for the Pope. When a Catholic says, I've got harsh words for the Pope, something has gone wrong in the world. The Pope ought to fix the Catholic Church. In other words, mind your own business, Pope. I'm Catholic. I know what's right. You stay out of this. As a Catholic, Holman should know better than to critique the Pope over clear Catholic teaching. So should Vice President J.D. Vance, a relatively recent Catholic convert who got a pointed correction to his faulty Catholic theology in Francis's letter. If the Pope has to write a letter to correct you, Skye Jitani, your theology, you, like a single person.
I should be so honored.
I'm correcting a movement.
You get so Protestant at that point.
Right, yeah.
You should probably rethink, if you're Catholic, if the Pope has to single you out to say that's not Catholic theology.
There's a lot of Catholics who don't like this Pope.
That's true.
He said, this is quite a quote from Pope Francis, the rightly formed conscience cannot fail to make a critical judgment and express its disagreement with any measure that tacitly or explicitly identifies the illegal status of some migrants with criminality. So if you're saying they're criminals just because they're here, the Pope says you got to rethink your conscience.
Can I make a slightly uncomfortable comparison?
Yes.
We'll see after you've made it.
Says yes.
Yes.
Okay. I see a weird parallel here on the extreme right with some theology that has developed on the left. And I'll give you an example. And I'm treading into dangerous territory here.
Yeah.
Okay. For 2,000 years in the Christian tradition, up to 5,000 years in the Judeo-Christian tradition, and you can even probably go beyond that, but at least in the Christian tradition, marriage has been defined as the union of a man and a woman.
Mm-hmm.
And
I've heard of that.
Yes. And very, very, very recently, a small segment of the church has said, no. That's not a Christian understanding of marriage. Marriage can be any two people, same gender, whatever. And certain segments of the church have really celebrated that change. And there have been majority of the church, and I would put myself in this category, says, listen,
and the Pope with you.
And the Pope with me would say, there might be a civil argument for redefining marriage, but the Christian doctrine of marriage is the Christian doctrine of marriage. And you can't just rewrite 2,000 years of church doctrine to fit the narrative of marriage that you now want. Similarly, on the right, we've had a long-standing 2,000-year doctrine about the way we think about refugees, immigrants, the poor, the marginalized, about charity and generosity, about the requirements of wealth and wealthy nations, towards it like that. This is well established in Christian doctrine. And in the course of a month, for a significant segment of at least the evangelical church in America to go, nah, that's not Christian. That's not it. It's just my family, my community, my nation. That's what Jesus meant. It's like, do you hear yourself? And do you realize you're swimming against the current? So like you need to slow down before you just chuck everything the church has taught for 2,000 years. And there's been a lot of criticism of where that's happened, especially on sexual ethics on the left, but it's now happening on justice ethics on the right. And they're both really damaging.
And I think African-American Christians would say, just now happening, Skye? Just now happening?
I'm just giving a contemporary example.
I think there might be a line. I think there might be a line from the KKK assembling in churches to the screaming housewives yelling at black students who are trying to walk to school in Birmingham, Alabama, and then who went to church the next Sunday and praised God, to the people saying, like someone on Twitter just a few days ago said to me, I care more about healing one leg in America than 1 million legs in Africa. So why would we fund their healthcare? So
I'm fine if someone thinks that.
There's a line.
I don't want them invoking the name of Jesus to justify that viewpoint.
We always have.
I agree. We always have, and it's not right.
It does come back to the point I tried to make a couple of weeks ago of this distinction between kind of love and mercy Christianity and law and order Christianity, where it's primarily about this is the way God made things, gender, race, sexuality. This is the thing that Jesus cares about, is how we're structuring our society, versus those that say these are the things that Jesus cares about. It's justice. It's lifting up those that are oppressed. It's preaching good news to the poor. It's the things that Jesus actually said with his mouth. So we see this playing out, and it's been playing out for 100 years. And Caitlin is looking at me like I'm crazy.
No, I think part of what you are describing is a failure of having any kind of political theology in most of our churches, because it's not just like what you are describing also describes the fact that most of us feel like we can sort of pick and choose the passages of scripture that will apply to the politics that we already had. I mean, some of the love and mercy people are very much just going, here are the policies I already believed mattered, and I'm going to stick some Bible verses on it.
And they feel loving to me.
And and I think part of the challenge is not only the fact that we have failed to kind of hand down any robust, coherent political theology to people in the church, but it's a failure of any kind of theology. We've basically said, like, sprinkle some Bible verses on the things that you want to believe politically, rather than saying, like, there is a lot that the Bible says about how a community should be structured. And that structure is not just about hierarchy and order. That structure also is intentionally in the Old Testament created to make sure that there are provisions for the most vulnerable people. Like we have ended up in a place where we're just picking and choosing Bible verses to support the things we already believed, without any sense that, to Skye's point, like there's consistent tradition of Christian thought about some of these things. And it doesn't divide neatly along political lines, but it also doesn't divide neatly along like parts of the Bible. Like there are the things that Jesus said, there are things the prophet said, there are the things the Old Testament law said that theologians have struggled, and not always perfectly, but have figured out ways to create a coherent theology of public life.
And where could we find this coherent theology best reflected?
I I have a syllabus. I could give you a syllabus.
Oh, okay. Maybe we should post the syllabus on the website so people can see it. Hey, what can you do? Well, 26 Jewish and Christian organizations have filed lawsuits against the Trump administration to reinstate the sensitive locations policy and prohibit immigration enforcement actions to take place in houses of worship unless there are extreme circumstances. So people are doing things, but you can also go to worldrelief.org/advocate, and they have a page on 10 different issues with instructions for how you can advocate for U.S. foreign aid to resume, how you can advocate for refugee resettlement in the U.S., how you can advocate for AIDS relief, which we've cut off funding for AIDS medication in Africa, which means people that are wrestling, but it's fine because of their medication, are much more likely now to get full-blown AIDS and ultimately pneumonia and die. There's a page for how to advocate to oppose deportation policies that separate families. All of these are on worldrelief.org/advocate. So if you feel powerless and like it's just bad news and there's nothing you can do about it, not true. It is bad news, but there is something you can do about it. So go check it out and come back next week and we'll talk about it more. Last words, Caitlin. I think you have a last thought in your mind.
No, I think that's a great
You
practical way to end.
Okay, thanks. Skye, last thought. Skye.
I'm just amazed by termite butts, Phil.
I know, isn't it something? I want to go trick-or-treating as one of those.
No,
But you'd have to knock on the door backwards.
No.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's a mask that you put on your butt, and it's a termite face. And then you knock on the door and say, "Let me into your food store." And then you just go in their pantry and
it's not a handout at the door. You just walk in like you're one of the kids.
Yeah. And then you say, "And by the way, I want you to groom me because I'm one of you." Pretty cool, huh? I think that's a good idea for Halloween. I think Caitlin agrees too. And I think Caitlin's mom is pretty excited about it too. So we're going to go now. Appreciate you guys. Stay strong. We're the rebel resistance. We must stand up for what Jesus actually taught and love our neighbors, even if they don't live in the United States of America. And we'll see you next week. Bye. Today's episode is sponsored by Bushnell University. Do you want to lead faithfully in a chaotic world? Bushnell University's Masters of Arts in Theology and Culture is designed to equip Christians, pastors, ministry leaders, and workplace believers to be transformative in their communities. Guided by Dr. A.J. Swoboda. You may recognize him from episode 454 when he talked to Skye about deconstruction and doubt. Dr. Swoboda guides this 2-year program that blends deep theological formation with practical learning. With 2 immersive week-long residencies and flexible online coursework, you'll learn how to be resilient and lead others into deeper faith. Learn more at bushnell.edu and start your journey today. That's bushnell.edu. This episode is sponsored in part by World Relief. On the show, we've been talking a lot about cuts in government funding for refugee resettlement programs and other life-saving work done by organizations like World Relief. If you missed our January 29th episode with Matthew Sorens, World Relief's VP of Advocacy and Policy, I encourage you to listen for a deeper dive into these heartbreaking developments. Here's the bottom line. Funding for the initial resettlement of nearly 4,000 refugees currently in the U.S. in World Relief's care has been cut, and funding for millions in need of life-saving programs in Sudan, South Sudan, Haiti, and the DRC has been paused, with no clear indication of whether it will resume. This impacts the most basic assistance like food, shelter, and medical care, and lives are being lost even today as a result. Right now, head to worldrelief.org/stand and join The Path, World Relief's monthly giving community, to provide consistent, reliable support that fuels life-saving work when and where it's most needed. Let's stand in the gap and be the church. Go to worldrelief.org/stand and become a monthly partner today.
You might recall that Phil and I, along with a bunch of other Holy Post voices, were part of a documentary that came out last year called God and Country. It was produced by Rob Reiner, but it was actually based on a book called The Power Worshippers: Inside the Rise of Religious Nationalism. That book was written by my guest today, Katherine Stewart. For 15 years, she's gone deep down the rabbit hole of Christian nationalism. She's attended the conferences and revivals, she's interviewed the people bankrolling the movement, and she sat across the table from the ordinary Americans and evangelicals who are drawn into its orbit. What she's uncovered has been reported in the New York Times and the New Republic, and in her newest book, Money, Lies, and God: Inside the Movement to Destroy American Democracy. One thing that comes out clearly in her book and in this conversation is that many of the people behind the Christian nationalist movement don't really believe what they're selling. Many of the funders aren't even Christians. They have other motives behind wanting to see this thing succeed. And those who do identify as Christians are often using their huge events and audiences as a grift. They take advantage of fearful, desperate people to make a lot of money. But in the process, they're also undermining American democracy. Stewart's book is a detailed and extensively researched project, and I didn't have close to enough time to cover all of its themes in this conversation. So I also recorded a bonus interview for Holy Post Plus supporters with Katherine Stewart. If you're not yet a subscriber and you want to hear that bonus interview, we are still offering a 1-week free trial of Holy Post Plus, so go check that out at holypost.com and sign up today. Here's my conversation with Katherine Stewart. Katherine Stewart, welcome to the Holy Post.
Great to be here.
I am delighted to have you here. We've met before, but I've just read your new book, Money, Lies, and God. We're going to have a great conversation about this. Let's just start with the obvious question. Why Money, Lies, and God? What's behind this title?
Well, I titled the book Money, Lies, and God because first, money is a huge part of the story, meaning that vast concentrations of wealth have really destabilized the political system, the sort of rising levels of economic inequality that we've seen over the past decades have destabilized the political system in a variety of ways, and we can get into that later. Second, lies or conscious disinformation is really another huge feature of the movement. Movement leaders know if you can separate people from the facts, that makes them easier to control. And number three, God, because the most important ideological framework for the largest part of this movement is religious nationalism or Christian nationalism.
Okay, so you've been in this world for like 15 years, roughly. You've been studying it, immersed in it, reporting on it. And you've noticed that there are some consistent procedures that go towards building this movement. And you outline them very early in the book. And I want to take a few moments on each of them to kind of break down how these things happen. So the first one you identify is the need to build an information bubble that people live within. What does that look like today?
Well, in the book, I go to places like Reawaken America, which as you know, is a traveling.
Yeah, we got to talk about that in depth in a minute, but yes.
Oh my gosh. I've been to a few of them actually, and it's a traveling MAGA conspiracy fest, drawing thousands of people to mega churches around the country. It's organized by Mike Flynn and other members of sort of the MAGA inner circle. One of the Trump sons usually shows up to speak. And it's like you go in there and every single conspiracy you can possibly imagine and more is being promoted from the main stage or for some of the vendors. They talk about how the deep state, the globalists, the Rothschilds, the Illuminati are going to control every dime of your money. You're going to send your, public schools are nothing more than gender change operations. Anybody, the idea that spiritual warfare in the heavens is actually playing out in politics today. And that God's hand is on Donald Trump's shoulder, and anyone who goes against him is going against God. So anybody who is remotely, I would say, to the left of them, including properly conservative Republicans, moderate Republicans, classic liberals, et cetera, is construed as demonic on the side of Satan going against God's will. And it really separates people from the facts, not just the people attending these events, but when you go there, you see a lot of YouTubers and a lot of podcasters, and they're sort of disseminating all of this disinformation and conspiracism into all of these different channels. I mean, this is one of the things that sort of autocratic leaders like to do. They like to separate people from the facts. A disinformed public is really helpful to them for concentrating autocratic power.
I want to talk about the Reawaken America thing in a little bit, but it isn't just the people, like you said, who attend that rally, but the algorithm keeps people locked in this bubble of misinformation, whether it's YouTube folks, podcasts, and some of these really crazy ideas and conspiracies find their way all the way into mainstream media at places like Fox News and elsewhere. So that's step number one. Step number two is you argue that people must be conditioned to expect an imminent cataclysmic event. In other words, a constant state of emergency.
Absolutely.
In recent years, how do they define this imminent cataclysm? What do they fear is going to happen?
Well, it's another feature of autocratic governments. It's another way of bringing around an autocratic leader. You say, we, the good, true people of this nation, are being beset by these, demonic, satanic, Marxist, others, whatever. The consequences of loss in the political arena are too dire to ignore. We're facing an absolute apocalypse. And that clears the way for the acceptance of a strongman. The rules don't apply anymore because of this emergency. We can suspend the rules. We can suspend the laws. We can suspend the Constitution.
Right.
In order to sort of defeat this, amoral, demonic enemy.
And that gets to the third step, which you identify as convince them that a righteous minority of the population has the right to rule everyone else. So whether you embody that in a single autocratic leader or at least a righteous, God-ordained group of us who should be in charge, it's undermining the basic foundations of American democracy and a liberal republic like we have, which goes to number 4 as well, to undermine confidence in the democratic process. I want to talk about, as I said earlier, the Reawaken America tour, because there's one chapter in this book where you go to Las Vegas and you go to one of these events with a crew. And I know you've been to a number of them, but you talk about the origin of this event, this conference, and it was started by a guy named Clay Clark. Give us a little bit about his background, and then I want to get into some of the really amazing stuff you report on from this thing. But who's Clay Clark, and why did he start this Reawaken America tour?
Well, Clay Clark was a businessman, and during the COVID pandemic and the shutdown, I think it's a moment when a lot of people kind of went off the rails. They started to get really anxious about government interference in their lives. Look, we were all in trauma, because there was a moment when we didn't know what was happening. And, everything was getting shut down, and he became really sort of agitated about this. I'm not sure how he and Mike Flynn got connected, but they found this, I never would have thought that a pandemic would have been exploited for political purposes, but it was. I mean, it upset a lot of people. They felt like their liberty was being infringed upon. I think the fact that a lot of churches were being shut down was very upsetting to a lot of people. Public health officials, of course, are very concerned about spread of disease. They're also very concerned about hospitals. A lot of hospitals were completely overwhelmed, didn't have the staffing, didn't have the beds to sort of keep up with the number of people who are very ill. You and I probably both know a number of people. A lot of folks lost their parents during that period. It was a very, very sad period. There was a lot of chaos, but that was the sort of springboard for this activism. And since then, Reawaken America has been traveling around the country, establishing itself in mega churches and drawing thousands of people to these events. And when you walk in, it's like, I think people who haven't been to these events, it's like you have to sort of be there to see it.
Yeah, I've heard Tim Alberto talk about these events as well, or similar ones, and the stories that come out of them are just amazing. So I want to quote something you quote in your book. This is on page 184. You quote Clay Clark at the Reawaken America tour.
Oh my gosh.
And I can't possibly read it as quickly as he said it, because you talk about how he has this auctioneer-like cadence and speed to his speech.
And it was like 5 times as fast.
Right. Okay. So if you're listening to this, speed up your playback on your iPod player, whatever. Anyway, this is what he says. The World Economic Forum has the logo 666. Look it up. Their logo is 666. By the way, I did look it up. It's not 666. And if you're new to reading the Bible, in the Bible, it tells you where Satan lives. The Bible tells you in the book of Revelation, it tells you, Revelation 9:11, okay, that Satan dwelleth by the former temple of Apollo. Satan dwelleth where the former temple of Apollo is. Who knows that? Revelation 9:11, okay? And it is also tells you that Satan dwells where Antipas was partnered, and Geneva is that location of that. And that is the location of the World Economic Forum, and that is the location of the World Health Organization, and that is the location of the United Nations, and that is the location of CERV, and CERV's logo is 666. Are we all on the same page here? Okay, this is what he says. It is complete nonsense. These logos are not 666. The Temple of Apollo was nowhere near Geneva. It was in Greece. Like, all this is just complete nonsense. So the reason I mention this is because following multiple sessions like this about all kinds of crazy conspiracy theories about Anthony Fauci and Hunter Biden and on and on and on, you talk about how things quickly transition from demonizing to fleecing, because Clark then introduces somebody from the Beverly Hills Precious Metals Company where they can liquidate their 401ks and buy precious metals because the end of the world is coming. And they say, so here, okay, all that to get to this question. When you look at the people leading these events, whether it's Clark or some of the other, Michael Flynn, Sean Foyt, all these folks, do you think they actually believe what they're saying? Or is this whole thing just a giant grift on innocent and vulnerable people?
I think we can't know what's in people's hearts. I do think that there is a lot of grifting going on, but I also think that a lot of these folks are operating in an information bubble themselves. They're hearing this stuff from one another. They're getting this sort of confirmation all the time. It's almost like a familiar refrain. It's really about fear. It's,
absolutely,
they're going to come after you in the streets. They're going to come after you in your house. They're going to take all of your money away. You need to trust us because we're gonna help save you, and Donald Trump is really gonna help save you. All the charges, that's all just political persecution. There's nothing to it. He's a white hat fighting the black hats. I mean, you hear this kind of stuff there all the time, that he's an agent of God.
The part that I can't get my mind around, though, is we at the Holy Post are regularly criticized. David French is regularly criticized as selling out to the left for money. David got a job at the New York Times, and they think we're making tons of money here at the Holy Post because we're, against Christian nationalism, whatever. But when you look at what these guys are doing and the amount of money they are raking in by selling this nonsense to people in the name of God, it's stunning how much grift is happening on the far right these days.
It's really sad. Here's the big grift. Okay. In the book, Money, Lies, and God, I pay a lot of attention to the funders. And I think there's a real mismatch between the agenda of the funders and the agenda of the rank and file. Look, the rank and file want a better deal for themselves and for the workforce. Rightly so, because we're living in an era where a lot of people are feeling like they're getting left behind. Life isn't as easy for them as it was for their parents. Look, 1950s, let's say you could, have one parent working so the other one could stay at home and raise kids. Well, if that's what they wanted to do, you could buy a house on a single person salary. Public schools are really, this is a great age of public education. There was, you could get a really great education. You could, kind of afford a life. There's obviously, it wasn't perfect for everybody, but for more America, there was a kind of post-war prosperity. It was a really an era of post-war prosperity, and back then the average CEO made something like maybe 24 times the average salary of their worker. Well, today, a CEO of a Fortune 500 company is making many, many hundreds of times like the salary of the average worker. And we're just seeing a kind of era of epic, wealth at the tippy top, and life is getting really harder for people at the bottom 90%. And so people feel left behind. So they really want like a better deal for themselves. But billionaires that are funding this movement, they want an end to workplace protections. They want lower taxes for the rich, the super rich. They want a deregulatory environment so that their, monopolistic businesses in many instances can make more money. But they also at the same time want certain kinds of protections for those businesses. They want, in some cases, taxpayer subsidies. So there's a real mismatch between what the billionaires at the top who are funding this movement want and what the rank and file are seeking.
Yeah, at one point in the book, you say that this coalition of folks that make up this far-right MAGA Christian nationalist movement, you say that it rests on an alliance between oppressors and many of their principal victims.
Yes.
And one of the themes that comes out really strongly in your book is the contradictions at the heart of this. And you interviewed a number of folks at these events or different churches or places where you went. And in a way, your empathy comes out. You can understand that these people have legitimate concerns.
Absolutely.
And fears in some cases, but they've latched on to this movement which is actually exploiting them. So let's talk about some of the inconsistencies embedded in this movement that people aren't quite articulating as clearly as you are. Toward the end of the book, you're talking about, I love this quote, J.D. Vance and Josh Hawley, who's J.D. Vance, of course, is the vice president of the United States now, and Hawley is a Republican senator from Missouri. And you point out the fact that these two guys who are big supporters of this side of the movement, they're Ivy League graduates, which is entertaining. So you talk about these graduates of elite universities expect us to believe that they are genuine representatives of the common man, the forgotten hillbillies, and they pretend to stand up for the workers against oppressive corporations. On the other hand, there is zero realistic chance that they will deviate from in any significant way from the preferred policies of the private equity managers that have funded their careers. And that kind of encapsulates the contradiction that they're appealing to the middle class, the lower class, the uneducated, and promising to be their advocates. But what they're really doing is the bidding of the folks, including the tech bros who have funded their careers. Let's talk about some of those contradictions, though. Like this movement talks a lot about small government, and yet what are they actually pursuing? Does it look like small government?
Oh my gosh. I mean, it's looking right now. I mean, we're all sort of preoccupied with the dismantling of the features of government. I mean, why on earth would they call it smashing the administrative state. Mm-hmm. And, this is something that a lot of the new right thinkers talk about. They're talking about, the VA, services for veterans. They're talking about air traffic controllers. They're talking about people who manage public parks. They want to sort of smash it all. They want to replace civil servants who generally try and keep their heads down, stay out of politics, and just do their job. And want to replace them with loyalists. I mean, this is incredibly dangerous. We're really talking about the dismantling of democracy. What they don't want is any investigation of corruption at the top. It's almost like going to be a feeding frenzy at the top for the, Trump and his inner circle and the tech bros who are kind of helping him. I mean, what does Musk really want? He wants privileged government contracts for himself. He's put like half a dozen kids really in charge of grandma's Social Security. I mean, really?
So another aspect that comes out is these folks talk a lot about free speech and stopping cancel culture. But on the flip side, they want the government to go after corporations that are pursuing DEI or what they consider to be woke initiatives, which seems like a contradiction. How can you advocate for free speech, but then tell the government, we want you to go in and stop the speech of people and institutions we don't like?
It's true. It's not unreasonable to look at diversity policies, but that's not what they're doing. They're weaponizing this stuff and blaming anything they don't like on DEI. I think about, can you imagine any president at any other time using the opportunity of, seeing an airplane tragedy, an airplane crash that results in dozens of really horrible deaths? Can you imagine any other president using that as an opportunity to take a swipe at workplace diversity, for which there is no evidence whatsoever that this played a role? I mean, what about all the other airplane crashes? Unfortunately, there have been a few. Were those a consequence of diversity as well? It's just, you can't imagine any other president doing such a thing.
Yeah, sorry to deviate here, but like there has not been a significant air disaster in America in 16 years, thank God. There were far more frequent airline crashes in the 1980s and 1990s at a time when the FAA workforce was far less diverse. So if you really want to make the argument that it's about diversity, it would seem like when there was more just white men running the show, there were more airline crashes, which of course I don't think has any correlation whatsoever to any of this.
But it's not, I mean, it's the exploitation of a tragedy.
Exactly.
And, but this is what they do. They like sort of, with the rank and file, they get them focused on these little, frankly, side issues that don't really affect people in their day-to-day lives. They do that as a sideshow so that they're not looking at the bigger picture, which is, you know, the people at the tippy top want low taxes for the rich. They want, access to privileged contracts for their monopolistic businesses. But here's the thing. I think that a lot of those people at the very top, they're not as rational as we might think they are. I think a lot of these very rich billionaires who are funding the movement, I mean, talk about, by the way, just as an aside, the funders, I'm thinking about people like Barry Seid or the Corkerys or Tim Dunn or the Wilkes brothers. I mean, there's so many, talk about a number of them in my book. Religiously, they're all over the map.
Exactly.
You know? Some are Catholic, some are evangelical, some are Protestant of some type, some are Jewish, some are really quite atheistic. So religiously, again, they're all over the place. But what they have in common is a sort of, I think it's a fear of the common person. I think they live in these very wealthy bubbles, but they can sort of hear in the distance over the walls, the people saying, wait a second, like I'm working 3 jobs, working my butt off, and I can't like have a decent living for my kid. And, it's making my life harder. And you're kind of this type of wealth, from some sort of monopolistic business. Like, why aren't you paying your taxes? Like, so they can hear that. And I think they're really afraid of the people. So they kind of want to squash them. They want to disinform them because that makes them easier to control. And they think that an autocrat will serve them better than democracy. I mean, it's really sad in a way. The idea that investing their wealth in the destruction of democracy is going to benefit them in the end, I think is sadly mistaken.
Yeah. One of the things you illuminate so well in this book is the gap between the money interests that are funding this movement and the people that are actually populating this movement. They don't share the same goals. And
that's true.
And they don't even share the same faith in many regards. As a Christian and as an American, the part that I grieve the most in this book is the way that this movement has managed to take ideas that are profoundly out of sync with Orthodox Christianity and ideas that are profoundly out of sync with American values and the Constitution, but make people believe that they're Christian or make people believe that they're American. You quoted one of the people you interviewed in the book said that they've put a top hat on Jefferson Davis and call him Abraham Lincoln.
I know. I mean, their idea is as far as, what Abraham Lincoln could have wanted or Thomas Jefferson or Frederick Douglass or any number of the other folks who actually helped build this country over time. I mean, when you talk about sort of the form of what they see as Christianity, it was very interesting. I think it's hard to overstate the degree to which the politics leads the religion,
right,
rather than the other way around. So, recently I was at America Fest. It's an annual gathering held by Turning Point USA, one of the movement's big organizations. They play a really critical role in the voter turnout of the movement. They, also play a big role in sort of getting youth involved. And so they had this thing called America Fest. It was in Phoenix, Arizona. 20,000 people were there. And speaker after speaker was incredibly hostile to what they called progressive or woke Christianity. They basically said that not all Christians who call themselves Christians are truly Christian. And the head of Turning Point USA Faith, this guy named Lucas Miles, said, I've made it my mission to eradicate wokeism from the American pulpit. He's the author of a book called Woke Jesus, the False Messiah, Destroying Christianity. And he traced this sort of supposedly woke Christianity back to the 1700s, and he called the social gospel heretical. I mean, for a lot of Christians, the social gospel is the gospel. So, or at least a huge piece of it. So it's very interesting that I think the movement saves some of its most poisonous words for people who sort of dare to interpret, Christianity in.
I mean, we're getting into kind of internecine challenges within the Christian tradition and community, and there are people who disagree with various bits of theology. But the part that I find most disturbing is when basic values and tenets of historic Christianity that you see in the Gospels themselves, things like compassion, empathy. I mean, there's a book out there called The Sin of Empathy, arguing that these basic values that have always been celebrated by Christians are now woke Christianity and to be discarded. So I think there's a place to critique different theologies and where they deviate from what we see in the life and ministry of Jesus. But when you can't even stomach Jesus himself, something's gone clearly off the rails here. We only have a few minutes left. I'd love for you to stick around to do a bonus segment about spirit warriors, which you have a whole incredible section on that. But before we go, one of the things that jumped out to me as we wrap up this part of the interview is there's a growing chorus of people from this end of the political spectrum saying that we need an American Caesar. They're actually using that language.
Red Caesar sometimes is what they call it. Yeah, American Caesar, or sometimes they call it a Red Caesar.
Yeah, which sounds like, a really terrible action flick from the 1980s. But yeah, they're calling for an American Red Caesar. What do they mean by that? And how do you see them rejoicing over the first couple of weeks here of the Trump administration because they think it's moving in that direction?
The idea of an American Caesar is present in both the religious right, which I cover in Money, Lies, and God, and also a movement called the New Right. And I see this there's a kind of tactical alliance between the religious right and the New Right. And there's some overlap, for instance, in somebody like Russell Vought, who is one of the architects of Project 2025. He's presently in the new Trump administration, Office of Management and Budget. He calls himself a Christian nationalist, but he's also very closely affiliated with the New Right. So there's some overlap. But if you really dig into a lot of the thinkers of the New Right, I would say a lot of them are really nihilistic, and some of them don't seem to believe in anything more than power. They see democracy as a failed experiment because they're always criticizing elites, but they want to be the new elite. And they think a Red Caesar is what's going to get them there if they can sort of rally around an autocratic leader like Donald Trump, and that will give them the power that they want. They have this sort of patter, right? They say democracy has failed, because now we're facing an absolute emergency because there's too much equality. Women don't know their place. And, there's too much wokeness, which means, I don't know, whatever. You have to sort of ask them to define it. Somebody in some community college might be getting a raise that they don't deserve or something. And that's the biggest challenge facing our country. And so they say, we're in an apocalyptic moment. We need a Red Caesar to take over. And they're like, well, we're going to get a Caesar. Do you want a blue Caesar or a red Caesar? Meaning, they see that, inevitably, one of the people said, well, blue Caesar would look like a combination of Hillary Clinton and Pol Pot. Like, really?
But their point behind that statement is pretty terrifying. They're convinced that American democracy is going to collapse, that our form of government cannot sustain itself. And it's a fight now for it's kind of Lord of the Flies. Who's going to take... They
want it to collapse.
Right. I mean, who's going to take over? It's either going to be their dictator or our dictator, and they'd rather have their dictator.
I'm not sure they actually believe it. I mean, so much of that New Right is performative.
Well, that was my question earlier, is how many of these guys are just grifting a really naive and susceptible public, and they're coming to their rallies and they're watching their YouTube videos and they're buying their books and their merch and their apocalyptic, safe room merchandise, and they're just making a ton of money off of this, not realizing that they're actually fueling the very thing that might happen. We saw it on January 6th.
I know. I mean, one of the people who's very important in the sort of rise of the new right, a lot of them sort of really focus on Leo Strauss, another political theorist, who had this idea. The way they interpret it is that there's one kind of thing that you say to the general public, the little people, the lumpen proletariat, whatever. But then there's another thing that another kind of messaging that you only share among the inner circle. And I think that, a lot of them take this very seriously. And I think that there is a lot of that going on. They say one thing when they're messaging publicly, and they do another for themselves. But, a lot of their politics is just like, look at me explosions and performative stuff. Like, who cares about the morning after? They don't really think about what it takes to run a really complicated, democracy is a kind of complicated system, but it has been the key to this vast economic prosperity, the freedoms that we've enjoyed as a country. And they want to just blow all that up.
I know that's the short-sightedness of the whole
It's
thing.
really
Is
sad.
When you look at these foundations and very wealthy people that are funding this movement, they seem to be cutting off the limb that they're sitting on, because they forget that the very system they've benefited from that gave them their wealth and power, they're undermining, and they're going to go down with it. Katherine Stewart, thank you for the book, the terrifying book, Money, Lies, and God, Inside the Movement to Destroy American Democracy. It's incredibly illuminating. It helps make sense of some of the things we're seeing. You're kind of connecting the dots for us. But would you be willing to stick around for a few minutes? Because I want to do a bonus conversation about something we didn't get to in this, and that's the spirit warriors, the so-called prophets and other self-proclaimed Christian leaders that are driving a lot of this content. Thank you for being with us. Everyone, pick up the book, and I'm sure you can look up Katherine's other works. Some of the books are behind you there in the image, and you'll learn a lot. Thanks for being with us.
The Holy Post podcast is a production of Holy Post Media, produced by Mike Strelo, editing by Seth Gorvet. Help us create more thoughtful Christian media by subscribing to Holy Post Plus at holypost.com/plus. Also, be sure to leave a review on Apple Podcasts so more people can discover thoughtful Christian commentary, plus ukulele and occasional butt news. Visit holypost.com for show notes, news stories, Holy Post merchandise, and much, much more.